Let me tell you about something I never imagined I'd experience. My homestead got invaded by armed individuals claiming authority. The reason? A property association dispute. They arrived wearing tactical gear, carrying weapons alongside official-looking paperwork that turned out to be completely fabricated. The ironic part? They believed they were executing a perfect operation. Instead, they stumbled directly into my carefully prepared response. Let me explain from the beginning. Drop a comment about your location while listening. Have you ever pursued something so persistently that when you finally achieved it, you couldn't quite believe it was real? That described me. Sitting on a deck I constructed myself, drinking coffee cultivated elsewhere, overlooking 150 acres of independence I'd earned through hard work and sacrifice. No supervisors, no pre-dawn emergencies, no hostile confrontations with strangers. Just me, my canines, my livestock, a machine older than some relationships, and tranquility. Not the uncomfortable kind of quiet, the type that allows your stress to dissipate, the kind that confirms you've found home. When I purchased this property, I assumed I was finished with battles. I was mistaken. It began with signage, white plastic panels secured to my boundary with zip ties as if they belonged. Notice property under assessment. Riverside Acres Property Association. Compliance review required. I stood there for several minutes staring at it like it might provide clarification. It didn't. So I removed it, threw it in my burn barrel, and assumed some teenagers were playing property management games. That was error number 1, underestimating how far people will go when they believe paperwork grants them authority. Error number 2 was assuming Margaret would give up. The following day she appeared, SUV the shade of medical facility walls, positioned halfway across my gravel drive like part of a strategic formation. Out stepped a woman in pale pink, creased khakis, and reflective sunglasses, clipboard secured like a weapon under her arm. She didn't observe my land. She studied me like I represented a problem requiring resolution. "Hello there," she chirped as if we were about to exchange pleasantries. I wiped my hands clean and leaned against a fence post. "Something I can help with?" "I'm Margaret, Riverside Property Association President. Just making rounds. Wanted to personally welcome you to our district." I stared blankly. "Property Association?" She smiled broader. "Riverside Acres Property Association. We're a chartered community organization focused on maintaining aesthetic and environmental standards across all properties." I actually laughed. "This is agricultural land. The only aesthetic standard here is avoiding livestock collisions." She remained unmoved. "Our regulations cover barrier heights, building specifications, animal ratios, and sound levels. We're currently in an educational phase, but violations will commence at month's end." "Ma'am," I said, "you can't cite a sheep." "Oh, we don't cite the animals," she replied sweetly. "Just their caretakers." She handed me a manila envelope marked, "Welcome Information Action Required." Before I could respond, she pivoted on her orthopedic shoes and departed like she'd delivered legal papers. I opened it immediately. Page after page of fabricated rules, diagrams of my structures, circled photographs of my fencing taken from angles I didn't know existed. Apparently my satellite equipment was visible from the southern sightline, constituting a visual violation. I didn't discard it. I incinerated it. 2 days later, new signs materialized. Larger, laminated, zip-tied higher, one nailed to my barn entrance. "Under enforcement review, violations pending." I tore them down again. This time they returned with permanent fasteners. And not just signs, people. 2 of them, mid-30s, matching khakis, vests with iron-on patches, reading Property Association Patrol. Watched from my deck as they walked my perimeter with radios and clipboards like they were conducting surveillance. One pointed at my tractor and spoke into his device. I stepped off the deck. They froze like deer hearing a gunshot. "Something I can assist you gentlemen with." One spoke nervously, rehearsed. "We're conducting a compliance assessment under Property Association protocol." I approached closer. "You have identification?" "We operate under the Riverside Acres Charter." "Excellent. Then you're trespassing under the Henderson Property Charter. Leave." They departed, but not before one dropped his clipboard. Inside, patrol routes, maps, properties marked with red symbols. Mine was labeled Priority Alpha High Resistance. I photographed it. Then I contacted a friend in town, a sheriff's deputy. He hadn't heard of any property association, but he knew Margaret. "Oh yes," he said. "She tried to shut down the grain store last year." called it a rural disturbance issue. That's when I realized this wasn't isolated. Margaret had plans. Plans that included men with radios, fake documentation, patrols, and possibly worse. I began preparing, not for combat, for absurdity. Motion detectors, surveillance cameras, remote lighting. Nothing lethal. Just enough to remind them this land defends itself. Because next time they crossed my boundaries, they wouldn't depart with just a warning. When they returned, they didn't announce themselves. They came before sunrise in silence with reinforcements. But they were unaware they'd entered territory where I make the rules. You never forget the sound of trouble trying to be stealthy. There's a particular rhythm, measured, almost careful, like a pulse just slightly too rapid. I heard it before seeing anything. The wind was still. Sky remained dark. Even the chickens hadn't begun their morning disputes. But that crunching on gravel, too heavy for wind, too light for vehicles, too coordinated for wildlife. I didn't panic. Just grabbed my boots and mug already half full with yesterday's reheated coffee. Muscle memory. I didn't need to look. I knew they'd returned. Fake property association troops. Margaret's clipboard commandos. I'd expected they'd try again. Just not this quickly. I entered the kitchen and extinguished interior lights, controlled my breathing, and listened. Crunch, pause, crunch, crunch. Multiple footsteps, 5, maybe 6. I moved to the side window. Near the barn, 5 shadows moved in a lazy arc. Flashlights off, radio earpieces in, vests, khakis. One individual still carried a clipboard because apparently even wannabe commandos need documentation. The addition, they wore headlamps now, strapped to their foreheads like miners or discount special forces. I crouched low and observed. 3 veered toward the east fence where Betsy the goat slept luxuriously. 2 others remained near the front gate. Then came the voice crackling and half-whispered through their radio. Team Alpha in position. Begin sweep. Target is presumed armed but compliant under Phase 1. Target presumed armed, Phase 1. I chuckled because, what else do you do when the neighborhood watch believes they're raiding a terrorist compound? But the humor didn't reach my eyes. Something within me had shifted. That familiar hum returned, the one I hadn't felt since deployment overseas. The weight behind the eyes. The controlled breathing. Awareness, training, threat evaluation. I moved to the mudroom, slipped on the jacket with the emergency light trigger in the pocket. Not because I needed it, but because I wanted to observe their reaction when they saw me respond. They crossed the second fence, quiet, confident, until one triggered the wire. Click, then boom. Not an explosion. A flood of illumination and sound. High-beam floodlights burst on like I'd summoned daylight with a remote. Sirens screamed from 4 locations. The barn lit up like a stadium. 2 individuals dropped flat. One screamed and dove behind the water container. Another collided with Betsy's enclosure. Bad decision. Betsy rammed him in the thigh, flipped him over, then stared down expecting an explanation. I stepped onto the deck, didn't rush or shout, just sipped my coffee and said, "Good morning, gentlemen. Y'all planning to introduce yourselves, or were you hoping for stealth?" One straightened up, clipboard guy. "We are acting under Property Association Emergency Code 7A to seize non-compliant property." Emergency Code 7A. I raised an eyebrow. "Did y'all invent that in a coloring book?" He didn't flinch. "We are empowered by community vote to remove unauthorized structures, reclaim misused land, and enforce property value security. You going to enforce it with that clipboard?" Another one, shaking and sweating, raised something that looked like a taser. "This is a citizens enforcement zone," he said, voice cracking. "We are within operational bounds." I took 1 step down from the deck. "You're in my yard, armed, threatening seizure of property under fake laws printed on a library computer." Clipboard guy pulled out a folder. "This document authorizes us." I snatched it. Half the pages said, draft. One had a coffee stain and what appeared to be melted cheese stuck to the corner. This looks like it was written by a sleep-deprived 10th grader with control issues. Suddenly, gravel crunch, tires approached, a car, but not one of theirs. Sheriff Davidson. Red and blue lights stuttered down the driveway like divine intervention. Squad car rolled in slow and loud. The Property Association enforcers froze. Clipboard guy turned. Abort, but it was too late. Davidson stepped out, squinting into the chaos. One of the fake officers was still being confronted by Betsy. Another had buried his face in dirt like it offered legal protection. Davidson looked at me deadpan. "Henderson, what in hell is this?" "Performance theater," I said. "Opening act." Property Association SWAT team. Davidson turned to the group. Hands where I can see them. Drop the clipboards. One individual actually said, "We're acting under civilian compliance jurisdiction." Davidson walked right up, grabbed the badge on his vest, and ripped it clean off. "Friend, this says Compliance Officer Tier 2. You're lucky it doesn't say Mall Security." He held up a binder, leather-bound, homemade. The cover read, Riverside Acres Compliance Authority Internal Codex. Davidson flipped through color-coded charts, rank structure, lamination everywhere. There were pages labeled Violation Classes. Davidson read aloud. Class 1 violation, fencing misalignment. Class 2, unauthorized rooster activity. Class 3, hostile resident behavior. He snapped the book shut. I've seen cults with fewer rules. One guy blurted out, "We were told to enforce protocol." By whom? Davidson glanced at me. I said it first. Margaret, 3 arrests, 2 citations, 1 comprehensive report filed with the county investigator. But the revelation. Davidson found a list tucked in the binder, a spreadsheet with names. Mine highlighted red, obstructionist, high threat. Others crossed out. Davidson whistled. You know any of these? Yeah, I said. Neighbors. 2 sold out this year, 1 went silent. This isn't just property association cosplay, he said. This is coordinated targeting, he sighed. I'll call in a fraud investigator. Maybe federal involvement, but you should know, Margaret's escalating. She's not stopping. I already knew because later that night a certified letter appeared in my mailbox. Margaret. She was suing me for hostile disruption of sanctioned community action, for undermining volunteer enforcement personnel, for intentional obstruction of cooperative land reclamation. The worst part, she had legitimate legal representation. Someone was financing her. Someone with more resources than a folding table and clipboard. Tucked inside the envelope was a list of names. Not just mine, not just neighbors, but one name I knew better than anyone. Someone I'd shared drinks with. Someone who helped construct my barn. Next to their name, a single word. Informant. They say power corrupts. But nobody tells you how rapidly it happens when the only thing between someone and total control is a clipboard. Margaret didn't fold after the arrest. She didn't retreat. She escalated and dragged the entire neighborhood with her. It started with the flyers. She didn't just post them in mailboxes. She launched them, printed in grayscale, clipped to plastic stakes, and stabbed into the ground at the road entrance like military signage. Each one featured a photograph of my property. Aerial shot, probably from a drone. Labeled Zone B, non-compliant, high risk. Below that, bullet points, unauthorized livestock, illegal fencing configuration, documented verbal hostility to enforcement officers. Then the best part, subject has refused all attempts at reintegration. Neighbors are advised to avoid unsanctioned contact. I couldn't believe it. She was distributing social isolation notices. The worst part, it worked. Neighbors who used to wave stopped making eye contact. The person who sold me feed quietly raised prices. One of the families who attended my 4th of July barbecue last year posted a message in the community group. We support order. We support community standards. If you're not part of the solution, you're part of the risk. I stood in my field staring at a sign about my hostile goats and realized this wasn't a petty dispute anymore. Margaret was building a regime. Then she held the rally in her driveway. No chairs, no permits, just a fold-out table, microphone, and poster board reading, Emergency Compliance Briefing, Tier 3 Response. I stood across the street, didn't hide, just observed. At least 15 people showed up. Some looked confused, some looked scared. A few were already wearing Property Association-branded safety vests. Margaret tapped the microphone. We're under siege, she said, and it's coming from within. She held up one of the flyers with my property photo. This resident has refused compliance for 3 consecutive review cycles. He has verbally threatened officers. He has refused dialogue, she pointed at me. He thinks he's untouchable, but no one is above the rules. She passed out flyers like communion wafers. He may call it freedom. We call it negligence. We call it disorder. I shouted across the road. You call a goat bleeding at 6 a.m. a security threat. Margaret ignored me. Effective immediately, the Property Association is initiating a community isolation protocol. Residents are discouraged from contact. No favors, no support, no engagement. The crowd nodded. Some applauded. That's when I realized it wasn't just propaganda. She had followers. Later that night, I found a notice in my mailbox. It wasn't mailed. It was laminated. Resident classification, Tier 3, critical non-compliant. Under it, remove livestock. Paint bar neutral gray. Attend re-education seminar. And submit apology statement to board. There was even a time and date listed for the seminar. Location, Margaret's garage. One of the sessions was called Silent Boundaries: How Your Property Speaks for You. I nearly choked. This was Orwell with a polo shirt, but it got worse. 2 of my trail cameras went offline the next day, then a third. When I checked the wiring, they'd been cut. Davidson came out. You think it's her? She's the only one who knows where I positioned these. He nodded. She's not just posturing anymore. That night, a white sedan parked 2 properties down. Didn't move. I watched it through binoculars. Tinted windows, no plates, just idling. I walked toward it with a flashlight. The engine revved and it peeled out. The registration traced to something called Community Horizon Outreach. The director, Margaret. She'd established a shell nonprofit just to cover surveillance. Then came Rex, my dog, border collie. 8 years old, smarter than most people I've worked with. That night I heard him whimpering near the barn. I found him behind the ATV, shaking, one paw bleeding. He yelped when I touched it. Blood, deep cut, embedded glass. I checked the barn floor, found it. Jagged shards scattered near the rear door. Green-brown glass purposefully hidden. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just picked him up and whispered, "It's okay. I've got you." Davidson arrived 20 minutes later. He swept the area, took samples. "This wasn't an accident," he said. "This was a message." He was right, because I'd reached my line and Margaret had just danced over it. The next day, I went public. I uploaded everything. The video of the fake raid, the fabricated seizure warrants, her flyers, Rex's injury, surveillance logs, the Property Association's rule book, and laminated re-education guides. I posted it with the caption, "When the Property Association thinks they're the FBI." Within hours, the video exploded. Comments, shares, messages from other rural homeowners who'd seen identical tactics in their areas. Within 24 hours, it had over 300,000 views. People started turning. Margaret's online defenders vanished. Her compliance team, half of them resigned, but she wasn't finished because 2 days later she appeared at my door. No clipboard, just a manila folder, no smile. "You think this is about goats?" I said nothing. "You think this ends with me?" She stepped forward, voice low. "You've kicked something you don't understand." She handed me the folder, then walked away. Inside, printed emails, signed memos, a document labeled Regional Initiative, Rural Behavioral Management Phase 2. It had government seals, contacts I recognized, people I'd worked with years ago. It wasn't just property association nonsense anymore. This wasn't local. This was federal. That folder didn't just implicate Margaret. It exposed something larger, a plan, a network, and my name was listed as primary resistance node. They thought I'd be easy to silence. They forgot who I used to be and what I still am. The folder sat on my kitchen table for 6 hours before I opened it again. Not because I was afraid of what I'd find, but because I already knew what it meant. It had government headers, agency abbreviations, real formatting, not the stuff Margaret printed at the copy shop. The top page, Rural Behavioral Management, Phase 2. I stared at it like it was an old enemy, because in a way, it was. This wasn't just paperwork. This was doctrine. I'd seen it before overseas, back when our job wasn't to fight but to reshape communities. Post-conflict engagement zones, they called them. But we knew what it really was. Control through soft power. Change the signs. Change the rules. Change the way people talk about their neighbors. Now it was here, in a 3-ring binder carried to my doorstep by a woman whose hobby was code enforcement cosplay. Davidson pulled up 2 hours later. I didn't say anything at first, just slid the folder across the table. He opened it, flipped through page by page. "Where'd you get this?"
She gave it to me on purpose.
She said I'd kicked something I couldn't stop. Davidson closed the folder. Then he called the county attorney. She came out same day. Tough, sharp, arrived with an investigator and portable scanner. They took the folder apart, Scanned every page, ran the headers, verified the stamps. Then she looked at me. "Did you know this program?" "I knew the people who built it." She blinked. "You were involved?" "No, but I was in the room. The state got involved fast. Within 24 hours, we had a warrant. Margaret's name was now tied to at least 5 separate cases across county lines, all involving false citations, impersonation, and real financial loss. The goal had always been land. Quietly push out rural owners, consolidate properties, enforce uniform standards through scare tactics and bureaucracy. Margaret wasn't the architect. She was the test pilot. Davidson and 2 agents rolled out the next morning, warrant in hand, cruiser out front, dash cam rolling. They knocked, nothing. Knocked again. Curtain shifted, but no answer. Finally, she opened it, wearing that same smug smirk, clipboard in hand like it had diplomatic immunity. "Do you have a warrant?" Davidson held it up. She didn't even flinch. "You're making a mistake." "You first," he said, stepping inside. The search started in her study. Books, maps, fake property association ledger. Then the real find. Behind a false panel in the bookshelf, a narrow doorway, no knob, just a sliding latch. Inside, a back office, surgical wall-to-wall binders. A whiteboard with names and faces, maps, schedules, rotation charts, a bank of monitors, all turned off. 3 had camera feeds still paused. One of those was my barn. There were 6 labeled binders: resident tier guide, compliance scripts, corrective language index, psychological reinforcement tactics, asset conversion model, Phase 3 strategy outline. Davidson flipped through the first. Inside, files on me, my name, my property layout, my habits. "You wake up around 4:50 most mornings. Feed animals by 6. Occasionally leave lights on in the front room past midnight. Rarely seen with visitors. Pattern rating, defiant, autonomous, vigilant." Davidson looked at me. "They were profiling you." "Not just me." He flipped again. 6 other names, other residents, all categorized. 1 labeled compliant, 1 labeled exit achieved, 1 labeled pending disruption. That last one had moved out last month. They found a wall map in the back. 3 counties. Red pins, blue pins, black pins, each labeled with a code. P1 probationary. P2 persuasion. P3 physical relocation encouraged. Davidson stepped back. "This isn't property association. This is psychological warfare. We bagged everything." The attorney filed charges that afternoon. Criminal harassment, wire fraud, identity manipulation, illegal surveillance, impersonating a public official, conspiracy to defraud. Margaret's lawyer tried to spin it, said it was a community experiment in grassroots cohesion. Davidson called it what it was, a cult with a mailing list. That night, someone knocked at my gate. Jerry, the neighbor who'd stopped waving. He looked broken. "I didn't know it would go this far," he said. "You believed her?" He didn't answer, just looked at the dirt. "She told us if we didn't help enforce it, we'd be next." I nodded once, closed the gate behind him. 2 days later, the county cracked the last hard drive, and what we saw blew the case wide open. Because it wasn't just me. There were files on 6 other properties, video reports, drone footage, fencing audits, even voice recordings from porch conversations. These people didn't just want your land. They wanted to watch you first, predict you, control you, then erase you. And Margaret wasn't the only node in the system. One of the signatures on the Phase 2 proposal was someone I knew, an old intelligence officer, retired, last seen consulting in D.C. I stared at it for a long time, not because I was shocked, but because I knew exactly what kind of people they were and what they do to keep their blueprint from unraveling. One last drive was labeled Phase 4 Contingency. It was locked, encrypted, but the title said enough because Phase 3 was about control, and Phase 4 meant someone was planning for failure or resistance and they were ready to act, which meant I had 1 shot left before this thing went national, and I was taking it head on. The drone returned at 4:12 a.m. Same low hum, different model, faster, smaller, smarter. It didn't hover this time. It swept low across the barn roof, then buzzed the tree line and disappeared. 15 minutes later, I found a circle burned into the ground near the north fence. Perfectly symmetrical, black paint. 2 slash lines cutting through the middle like an axe. Same symbol Davidson found on the Clearwater property. Same one used on their non-compliant targets. It wasn't just a warning. It was a marking. And whatever it meant they were coming. They didn't knock. They didn't call. They didn't send another flyer. They just walked in. 3 of them, no headlights, no vehicle in sight. I spotted them on the southwest camera first. Thermal signature said they'd been sitting in the woods for 20 minutes. Now they were approaching my driveway. Black vests, boots, walkie-talkies muted. One held a clipboard. The other 2 had rifles, real ones, clean, tightly slung. I didn't panic. I shut the laptop, locked the barn, walked calmly back to the porch, watched them, didn't speak. They didn't either. Then clipboard guy stepped forward. "We're here for seizure protocol." "You think this is legal?" I asked. He didn't blink. "You've failed to comply with re-education notices. Your vehicle and property are listed as forfeitable under Emergency Clause B9. He pulled a page from his folder and held it up like it meant something. "You've been designated as a primary resistance node." The man to his right twitched, kept glancing at the trees, kept adjusting his grip. The one on the left, calm, too calm, eyes glassy, focused, not on me. On the door behind me. "You're outnumbered," clipboard guy said. "Don't make this hard." I stepped forward 1 pace. "Tell me something," I said. "What? Who trained you?" He hesitated. That's when I knew they weren't real. Not law, not military. They were believers. They took another step forward. I stepped back, tapped the silent trigger on my watch. Steel barriers rose from the driveway with a low hiss. Motion sensors pinged. Floodlights engaged, not steady beams, strobes, red, disorienting, meant to confuse. Clipboard guy shielded his eyes. Twitchy guy raised his rifle. That was his mistake. My deck rig kicked in. 2 flashbangs deployed from opposite corners. No shrapnel, just pressure and sound. Loud enough to reset your brain for 30 seconds. They dropped. Just like that, my field turned into theirs. Except I'd planned for this. As they flailed, I moved under the side stair, rolled right. Hit the failsafe line I hadn't tested in 2 years. A buried cable set to trigger an old theft deterrent system I had rigged for equipment haulers. Across the field, 4 directional sirens fired up, piercing, oscillating, frequency coded to bounce off the barn and scatter echoes. The sound disoriented them instantly. Twitchy guy staggered, rifle half raised, blind. I closed the distance, grabbed the barrel, twisted, drove his shoulder into the gravel with my full weight. He didn't even fight. The calm one turned to run but stopped cold. Davidson's cruiser had arrived. No siren, no lights, just his voice. "Weapons down now." He stepped out, sidearm drawn, back up behind him. Real law, real response. Clipboard guy tried to reach for something. Davidson fired a warning shot. Not into the air, into the dirt, a puff of dust between the man's boots. He froze. I said now. They dropped their weapons, all of them. 4 more emerged from the woods, hands raised. 7 in total, armed, trained poorly, but enough to be dangerous. Davidson cuffed the first one, turned to me. "They said they were part of something bigger." I nodded. "They're not bluffing." Margaret, her playbook, her language, her followers. Davidson held up a badge he had pulled off one of their vests. "Enforcement Tier 1, Phase 4 certified." "You know what that means?" "I do now. At the station, they processed all 7. Most wouldn't talk, but the quiet one did. Right before they loaded him into the cruiser, he looked at me through the bars, smiled. "Phase 4 isn't about you." I didn't speak. "You think it ends here? You think this was about land?" He leaned closer to the bars. "It's about pattern disruption. You're not the enemy. You're the prototype." Then he winked and they took him away. We found more on them, forged IDs, maps, training schedules. One had a printed set of instructions for emergency engagement scenarios. Another had a laminated citizen arrest card. But the most disturbing find, a group photo, 10 people, all in vests, all with fake patches. Margaret in the middle and a title above it, Phase 4 Ground Team Unit 7, which meant there were at least 6 more. Davidson and I stood on the porch later that night, Rex at my feet. The air still hadn't shifted. "You think they'll come again?" he asked. "They won't stop," I said. "Not until this goes public or I disappear." He looked at me sideways. "You have a plan?" I nodded toward the last uncracked drive on my table. "It's labeled with my name. You going to open it?" "Not yet," he waited. "What are you waiting for?" I looked out across the field. Leverage. Because inside that drive was the final piece. And once I opened it, once I saw what they had on me, I wouldn't just be defending my land. I'd be dragging the truth out of the shadows. And it wouldn't just end Margaret's legacy. It might end mine. The last drive didn't come with a label, just my name, Henderson, sharpied in block letters. No logo, no date, no context. It sat on my kitchen table for 4 days, not because I was scared, but because I knew once I opened it, once I saw what was on it, there'd be no going back. Davidson offered to run it through evidence systems. I said no. If they'd spent this much time watching me, then they deserved to see me watching back. When I finally clicked it open, the screen flashed once. Then a logo appeared. OPRM, Operational Rural Management. Not Property Association, not County, not Margaret. Federal, a program I hadn't heard mentioned in a decade. I knew the name because I'd helped write part of it. 12 years ago, I'd submitted a report, outlined weaknesses in rural command structures, suggested techniques for post-instability recalibration. They hadn't just used my report, they'd built this entire framework from it. The drive held 4 folders. Phase 1, infiltration. Phase 2, conditioning. Phase 3, pressure. Phase 4, correction inside me. Drone footage, porch cameras, audio from the barn, conversations with Davidson. Every file had a label. Subject, Henderson, classification, autonomous, strategic, influence resistant. Then came the recording. My own voice. A call from years ago, outlining protocol for managing outlier behavior clusters. They didn't just weaponize a system against me. They used my own damn blueprints. Next were the personnel files. Margaret's Property Association presidency. Funded, promoted, managed. Her flyers, her committees, her compliance task force. All part of a beta rollout under a shell nonprofit. She wasn't the architect. She was the instrument. And I wasn't the enemy. I was the test. Then came the final file. Message, Tier Alpha. Margaret appeared on screen, clean, calm, smiling like this was a church announcement. If you're watching this, then you saw the truth. I didn't start this, but I believed in it. Still do. People like you don't obey. You disrupt. That's why we needed you. You showed us what resistance looks like and how to break it. Then she smiled and the screen cut to black. I sat in silence. Not because I was broken, but because I was steady. Davidson showed up an hour later. You opened it? I nodded. How bad?
Bad enough, he waited.
What now? I end it. I didn't go to the press. I went to the source, filed a federal whistleblower complaint, redacted the neighbors, named the contractors, attached every file. Then I hit publish. The story went wide. Former employees came forward. Oversight hearings opened. Margaret was indicted again, this time on federal charges. And OPRM was officially decommissioned. Again. But paperwork doesn't stop ideology. Things are quiet now. Rex still limps, but he runs. The barn holds. The goats yell. The fences stay up. But the waiting doesn't leave. Sometimes Rex growls when a truck slows at the gate. It never stops. But it never doesn't pause. I still get messages from strangers. It started here too. They called it a volunteer coalition. The documents looked real. We thought we were the only ones. They ask me what to do. I always say the same thing. Don't wait for someone else to fight your battle, because if they've already drawn the map, you're already on it. There was one final email buried in the drive, encrypted, deliberately hidden. We cracked it. No body, no signature, just a subject line. Reassignment, Pilot Zone, Midwest Beta. No explanation, no attachments, just coordinates. Not Riverside Acres, somewhere colder, somewhere flatter, somewhere even easier to disappear, because Phase 4 didn't end here. It just moved down the list. They thought I was the variable, the disruption, the glitch, but I wasn't.